indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. These words highlight the main idea behind the Declaration of Independence, the main reasons why the colonies are choosing to separate themselves from the English Empire. But how did we get here? How did we get to a point where 13 honestly successful colonies decide to break away from the largest, strongest empire in the world and go at it on their own? It wasn't a decision that was made lightly, and it wasn't a decision that was made overnight. There was a long path to independence, and that's what we're going to start looking at in this video. To understand how we got to the point of declaring our independence, we got to understand where we started. And that goes back to the founding or the colonization of North America. Now, when North America was colonized, it wasn't just the English. There's going to be 4 colonizing powers in North America who are going to be vying not only for the natural resources of the land, but the land itself. Now, the French got here about the same time as the English. Samuel de Champlain is going to start the first French colony of Quebec in 1608. The French are going to be driven primarily by economic and religious reasons. Economically, they saw a gold mine in the fur trade, and so that's going to be their focus when they start their colonies. But they also have religious motivation. They will be sending over Catholic Jesuit missionaries who will share the gospel with the Native Americans, offering them conversion, not necessarily forcing them, but definitely offering Native Americans a chance to convert to Christianity. Now, the Dutch, on the other hand, they're going to look primarily in what we consider modern-day New York. They're going to settle New Amsterdam. The Dutch at this time were a trading empire, and so they're looking to expand that trading empire, and they're looking at the resources that North America can provide. About the same time, a little bit earlier, the Spanish had already started colonizing in North America in the early 1500s. Now, they predominantly focused on the southwest corner of North America, but they also set up the first permanent colony in Florida, in St. Augustine. Now, when we look at these 3 colonizing powers, they are really different than what we see with the English. The primary differences we see is they brought over very few settlers. The economics was really what drove all 3, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. And so getting people over here to colonize was not their main goal. They set up alliances with the Native Americans one way or the other. We know the Spanish came in and didn't really set up an alliance with the Native Americans, but instead set up a system called the encomienda system, which was a system of enslaving the Native Americans. But they did build some relationships, because coming out of the Spanish Empire in North America, we have a whole new race of people called the mestizos, which was a cross between Spanish and Native Americans. Similar to what we see in the French in the Northeast, where you saw French fur trappers marry into Native American tribes to help build those relationships that would increase their trade in that area. The English, though, predominantly looked at creating permanent settlements, not just for trade or religion, but instead permanent settlements that could create a sense of, or create a mercantilistic system where England could continuously pull out natural resources from North America and expand those resources or send those resources out into the world. If you look at the English colonies, they also differed a little bit, especially from the Spanish, where the English government left these colonies alone. Because it was a mercantilistic system, You have to understand, England was looking for a positive economic flow coming out of the colonies, and they were getting that. And so this idea of salutary neglect, or allowing the colonies to function on their own without enforcing things like the Navigation Acts and stuff like that, that benefited England because they kept making money. I always say that if England had not been making money out of the colonies, that salutary neglect never would have existed. The government would have stepped in and put a thumb on top of the colonists and made sure that economically they were benefiting the mother country. That wasn't the case here. The colonies were definitely an economic benefit to England, and there was no need for oversight from the government. So when the colonists started setting up their own local governments and making their own local laws and charging their own local taxes, England really didn't get too involved because they were benefiting from all. So the colonists, this whole idea of salutary neglect, it's just leave me alone and we'll get the job done for you. In Europe, however, what we see happening is that rivalry that we talked about in North America is extending to the whole world. All these countries are trying to build their colonial empires. And in doing so, that's going to cause conflict between nations of Europe. Now, we all already know that England faced a war with Spain in which under Elizabeth I, the Spanish Armada was defeated. England also went to war with the Netherlands in the Anglo-Dutch Wars. And during that time, after a series of 3 wars, England defeated the Dutch. That's going to leave 2 major powers in Europe. Now, the Spanish and the Dutch are still there, but they don't have the influence that the English and the French have. And so we're going to see a war start between France and England that's going to be known as the Second 100 Years' War. And this war was based on the idea of taking control of colonies throughout the world. And England and France definitely had the most colonies, so they're going to be in competition with one another. The Second 100 Years' War is going to spill over into the 13 English colonies. One of the first examples, and there's 3 wars I'm going to talk to you about. These are known as the Imperial Wars. And while these wars were all fought predominantly over in Europe, they do spill over into North America. King William's War is a great example, where you're going to have the English military, which is present in the colonies at this time, going to be fighting with the French and their Native American allies. Now, this first war, King William's War, is going to basically result in a tie, I guess, if you will, because the Treaty of Ryswick is going to set up that there's going to be no land exchanged in North America. So while it's being fought here, it really doesn't change the status quo in the colonies. Now that differs when we get to Queen Anne's War in 1702. Again, it's going to be the English versus the French and their Native American allies. At the end of this Imperial War in North America, the Peace of Utrecht is going to be signed, in which England is going to gain control of French-held land, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and the Hudson Bay region, also known as Rupert's Land. And you can see it on this map here, where the English gain control. But you can also see that there is land that is being disputed. That's that purple and I guess that's blue or red striped area. A big thing that comes out of Queen Anne's War is the Asiento. The Asiento is going to afford England a monopoly on the African slave trade going to South America for 30 years. Now, you might not think that that has a huge role in the American African slave trade, but it does. It's setting up basically the market that England is going to control, and they are going to start bringing over all the African slaves coming into South America, but they'll make their way north very soon. Finally, King George's War, an 8-year war, and actually the colonists got involved in this one. Again, most of the fighting's going on in Europe, and most of the fighting is about gaining control of the other countries' colonies. And so that's what's happening here in North America as well. But this time you see New England colonists under the flag of England fighting with the English for French-held land because New England wanted to expand their territory. Well, what's going to happen is New England is actually going to take control of some French-controlled land. However, at the end of this war, the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, and I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that's going to be signed, and the land that was taken by New England is going to be returned to the French. In exchange, the French is going to give land in India to the English. So the English government was not too concerned about land being obtained in North America, but instead gained a lot of land over in Europe as well as in Asia. But the New Englanders were upset because they fought in this war thinking they had gained more land, only for it to be given away by the English government. So what do all of these wars have to do with America's road to the revolution, to the colonists actually declaring their independence? Well, there's one more war, one more imperial war that we haven't touched on, which I'm going to go a lot further in depth in. But I want you to look at this map of North America in 1750. You can basically see that when you look at what we consider the modern-day United States, France controls most of it. The English colonies over there on the East Coast, you can see them, and there's this disputed area in between the two. And that's this area right here. I'll show you with my mouse. This area right here is the disputed territory between France and England. And the reason why it's disputed is the King of England, George II, has started to give land grants to English colonists to move into that area, even though France claimed it as their own. This is going to be the underlying reason why the French and Indian War is going to be fought. The Fourth Imperial War of the Second Hundred Years' War. It goes from 1754 to 1763. Now, we refer to it in America as the French-Indian War, but you'll more often than not hear it be called the 7 Years' War. Either way, though, it's talking about this. When we talk about the French-Indian War, we have to talk about the Ohio River Valley, because that's what everything's being fought over. And because the Ohio River Valley, this area that I have circled on the map right here, is probably one of the most fertile regions in North America. Not only for agriculture, but also for hunting. You're going to start to see a lot of English fur trappers moving into this region and threatening that industry, that fur trapping industry that existed between the French and the Native Americans, and they threatened to take it over. On top of that, King George II was offering land grants to English colonists to also move into that area beyond the Allegheny Mountains. Now, what you're going to see happening is the French are going to start building a series of forts in the Ohio River Valley to protect their interests there and to protect themselves from English incursion into the region. Well, what's going to happen is the English army is going to start going in and trying to take down those forts. One of the first attempts to do that is going to happen when a young, I believe, lieutenant colonel, he might have not been that high in rank, but a young English officer is going to be sent in with a company of soldiers to take out a fort by the name of Fort Necessity. That young soldier is going to be George Washington, and he is absolutely going to fail miserably at trying to take Fort Necessity, but that's going to be what spurs the French and Indian War. A lot of people don't realize it. It was George Washington, the father of our future nation, who actually started the French-Indian War, which is ironic because the French-Indian War is step one towards the American Revolution. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. On our next video, we'll actually get into the war and look at how its outcome is going to have a profound effect on the relationship between the English colonies and their royal government. Until then, we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.